Uncivil War, written by Nico Tatarovich, read by Paul Whitehouse.
They say that history has a habit of repeating itself. And for one man in this next story, history repeating itself is getting a bit repetitive. Allow me to elaborate. It was Friday night, 21st of May, 1455. And for Richard, Duke of York, tomorrow couldn't come quickly enough. For he and 7,000 men, marching under the banner of the House of York, were camped to the east of St. Albans, sharpening swords, setting arrows, and waiting patiently to kick the absolute crap out of King Henry VI's army of House of Lancaster scum the following lunchtime. It was a battle that would become the First War of the Roses. Now, sadly, a term demoted to selling pay-per-view cricket matches. For the Duke and his men, it was a night of sombre planning, of rousing speeches and foul turnip-based cookery. Just as the Duke was finishing a particularly bland turnip soup, a herald entered his tent. "Permission to speak, sire," said the herald, not wanting his head cut off for being overfamiliar. "What news of those Lancaster bastards?" barked the Duke, sending white turnipy droplets all down himself. "The Duke of Buckingham has positioned a front line of men along the Sopwell Lane on behalf of King Henry IV. "Sixth," tutted the Duke. "Sixth, sorry," the herald corrected himself. Just then, a bloody mobile phone went off. "Oh, come on, guys. How many times? No phones," whined the Duke. "Sorry, Stephen," said the herald. "And no names. Stephen Dougal does not exist." The Duke was hot with rage inside. Did he really have to go over the rules of the Silver Blade Historical Society every bloody week? Did any of these feeble cretins truly understand what a fully immersive battle reenactment was all about? It's a way of life, based on secrecy, honouring history, and the keeping alive of traditional practices. No, it's a bloody knockout. I mean, we've got a fully operational battle trebuchet out there, for God's sake. There are wenches weaving actual baskets to sell at market tomorrow as we speak, and a lumpen blacksmith who looks like he needs a good wash. Even the children were being forced to forego their Batman pyjamas to sleep in itchy sackcloth nightwear. Did they think that he, Stephen Dougal, deep in his soul, was actually the chartered accountant he posed as during the week? Well, he wasn't. His spirit was so intertwined with Richard, Duke of York, that sometimes it actually frightened him. But not tonight. Not the night before his delicious weekly victory against that scoundrel, Henry VI. Martin Axsmith, also an accountant, but not even chartered, the loser, he thought to himself. King Henry sent this," said the herald, handing over a scroll that had been browned with tea bags. The Duke read with great concern. "Dear sir, it has come to my attention this morning via a Facebook post by medieval historian Callum MacDonald that new evidence suggests the First Battle of St. Albans may not have been quite as one-sided as we have been portraying it. I urge you to consider a change to the narrative of the battle tomorrow that allows for many more casualties for the House of York, so that my dispirited men may not have to suffer a one-sided massacre for the 97th weekend running. Yours, Henry VI. "What filth is this?" shouted the Duke, flinging the scroll onto a fire. How dare he evoke Facebook, of all things, in the hands of a monarch? "The battle will proceed as a rout for the House of York, and that is an end to the matter," he told the herald. "We march at 1, just after the motorcycle display team." Far across the field, upon receiving the Duke's response, King Henry VI was understandably despondent. "This is so fucking Stephen Dougal," he boomed to his soldiers. "He thinks his shit don't stink just 'cause he's gone chartered. He was exactly the same back at accountancy college." The king knew full well why they stuck to the same script every week. It was because that arrogant bastard always won, Mr. Big Shot. The real King Henry wouldn't have had this nonsense, and neither would Martin Axsmith. He gathered his men before him. "Tomorrow we fight the peril of indignity," he said, his throat tightening with pride. "We shall show those Yorkish scumbags a lesson. Are you with me?" The Red Roses roared their approval. The next day, back over at the Duke of York's camp, the lust of impending battle filled the air, alongside the smell of nearby barbecues being cooked by the modern types that were ruining it a bit. The Duke of York's men sounded their horns and began their march across the field. 100 yards from their enemy, the Duke, in what was easily his favourite bit of every meet, cried, "Charge!" The House of York sprinted like lions going in for the kill. But there was one minor problem. The House of Lancaster were not there. The Yorks' blood-curdling shouts petered out. They found themselves wandering around a dozen or so hastily improvised scarecrows decked in spare bits of armour. "Where the bloody hell are they?" an infantryman shrugged, scratching his head. The Duke was furious. "Cowards!" he boomed at the cloudless sky. "What we do now?" asked an infantryman sheepishly. "Why don't you just have a bit of a sword fight for the kiddies, like?" the herald suggested. "Are you insane?" said the Duke, piercing him with his eyes. "We are the House of York. We do not fight amongst ourselves. We head back to the camp as victors. This field is ours," he announced to the unimpressed crowd. "Arrows!" shouted a phalanx of distant voices, and whoosh, halfway across the field, out of nowhere, a flurry of actual arrows landed before their feet. "Have you lot gone mental?" screamed the Duke, as from both sides, hordes of Lancaster men came running towards him with swords aloft. "Die, bastards!" someone shouted, which seemed a bit strong with kids about. The crowd, untroubled by historical pedantry, cheered as swords and shields began to clank and smash into each other. But it was soon clear that there was something primal in the air, and that something was volcanic resentment coming to a head. The fighting instantly escalated, and watching children began to look to their puzzled parents for reassurance. "Don't worry, darling, they're just pretending," said a slightly confused woman in Birkenstocks as two men dropped their swords and rolled around on the floor, punching and nutting each other. A few minutes of aggro later, a siren sounded as the single police car on site began to weave its way across the field. "Retreat!" shouted King Henry, and his men turned and ran into the woods that lined the park, annexing the local primary school. The Duke of York's men retreated to their base and placed guards at every side. The community officer on duty approached the York's camp to try and calm things down, but the order went out to the archers to pin him back. And the uniformed doofus sprinted to avoid the arrows, and then, realising that things were spiralling out of control, he radioed to the station for backup. "PCX here over at Berners Heath. Got a bit of a situation down here with some of the battle reenactment chaps." He explained the situation as fully as he could. Over at the local police station, the reaction was instant. "Here, Hicks has lost control of the summer fete up on the heath." And with that, he was ordered to bloody well sort it out himself. With Henry's men dug deep into the forest, they sent the message out that they would attack again unless the Duke of York agrees to stage the reenactment in line with the new evidence discovered by local historian Callum MacDonald. But Stephen Bloody Dougal was not biting. "I have made my position clear," came his dukish reply. "I do not recognise the fripperies of modern technology." The exhausted herald wasn't expecting his king to be impressed by such a belligerent reply, but still, he was caught quite by surprise by the directness of his response. "Burn his car," he sneered. "Let's see if he recognises that." And that's pretty much when local TV news teams began to turn up. Within an hour, the entire region was glued to what had now become a primitive, armed standoff. Police resources were still thin, but now a couple more patrol cars were keeping a cautious distance while the nervy PC Hicks communicated with the two sides via loud hailer. "On behalf of the Hertfordshire Police, I urge both the Houses of York and Lancaster to consider laying down their arms in order to avoid further casualties. At this point, neither Martin Hacksmith nor Stephen Dougal were in charge of their own minds anymore. And so, both the King and the Duke told their forces to prepare shifts to stand guard for the night. When dawn came, both armies woke to find they were still being led by unreasonable men. "Don't you think this is going a bit far now?" the herald asked the Duke as he stirred his turnip porridge. But he was soon locked in a rudimentary wooden cage for treason. And so, for the second morning running, swords were sharpened, only sharper. Both armies took up positions on either side of the field. The watching TV audience licked their lips, and the early birds arrived to nab the best views. Suddenly, right on cue, a single flaming arrow shot across the sky like a comet, overshot its target, and set a muffin stall on fire. A roar went up as the two armies took their first steps towards each other. Whole families, some of whom had camped out overnight, sprang to their feet, thirsty for action. The two sides were running at each other, full pelt now, until a horn sounded and everyone stopped. It was PC Hicks, in the police car, racing across the field into no man's land. His loud hailer crackled into life. "Please remain calm," he begged. "I have here renowned medieval historian Calais MacDonald. He has definitive information that he claims will settle your quarrel." A stout man dressed in tweeds stepped out of the car, waving a white handkerchief aloft. The King and the Duke came forward alone and agreed to hear him away from the others. Surely enough, the historian produced the fruits of his research. He had managed to track down a priceless original historical parchment that the world had never seen before. It was a pact signed by the very Duke of York and King Henry VI himself, in which they effectively agreed to hugely over-exaggerate their rivalry to improve the legendary standing of their respective houses. Henry had never been captured by the Yorkists following the Battle of St Albans at all, and had in fact simply lived down in London for a few years as part of a land deal, during which time the Duke and the King actually became rather pally, playing badminton every Monday. "So you see," concluded the historian, "there's no need for you to assemble your force armies each week at all." The Duke and the King's heads were lowered. This news suited neither of them. Here was this bookworm, this so-called fact-finder, this quill pusher who knew nothing of how to tan a side of leather with a bucket of dog turds, or how to fashion a child-friendly shield from plywood and sell it for £6. I mean, he probably didn't even know how to make turnip tea, the fake! And now, in one fell swoop, he was about to destroy their way of life and their secret alter egos. If this information got out, there'd be no more reenactments, no weekend escapism, nothing. For the first time ever, the two men's eyes met with a shared sense of purpose. The assembled crowd couldn't really see what was going on, but a minute later things became intensely clear. "What's that, Mummy?" asked a little girl holding an ice lolly, as the historian's body was flung from the trebuchet into a lustrous hedge over a garden fence. "Right, that's it," huffed PC Hicks, finally growing a pair. "I'm going in." He sprinted across the field, baton drawn, but on arrival, all he found were the ashes of a burned old parchment. The truth had gone up in flames, leaving only historical debate and theory behind. Hicks radioed his superiors. "The suspects appear to have escaped, Sarge," he said flatly. "Well, did you get the names of the two leaders?" he was asked. "Oh, no, they never used their real names," he replied dumbly. "It's all very secretive." "Well, what did they look like?" demanded the sergeant. I didn't really see them close up, Sarge," he shrugged. "Anyway, they had like crowns and helmets and all that stuff." And so, as PC Hicks helped the herald out of the cage, the St John's ambulance crew began to treat poor old Callum MacDonald. A crowd of onlookers craned their necks and gossiped, trying to see what was going on, and mingling amongst them, in slacks and clumpy shoes and boring jumpers, looking just like everyone else, were two accountants, one normal, one chartered, standing on the same side, for now, until next time, when once again they will meet, and on that day, know this, dear viewer, battle will commence.